I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Lindy Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Welcome to
Arcane
Mark
Mark
East Coast Edition. Today, we're going to talk about GM tools, character-specific arcs. So, character-specific arcs represent when you are making a part of the plot that is tied to a character's backstories, goals, personalities, or something else that's specific to that character.
So you're talking in this case about player character-specific arcs rather than character-specific arcs that are specific to a story that centers around one NPC.
Sure, because you could claim that everything is a character-specific arc that's specific to the BBEG of that of that arc. But we really mean player character specific arcs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about a player character specific arc, you may think of that as like something that you only do in a home game. However, it turns out that you can do player character specific arcs completely well in a published adventure if you use some of the tips that we're going to give you here today. I'll give some examples of how I put some player character specific arcs in a published adventure while also doing the published adventure like pretty much as written.
Mm-hmm.
And spoiler alert, session 0 helps.
So to start with, if you're playing an adventure path or a published adventure that has some kind of a player's guide, like one of the Paizo adventures or like the Jewel of the Indigo Isles adventure path, then you're gonna find information that helps people to build characters that are then have natural ties into the adventure that are already pre-made for the GM. That'll say, okay, yeah, you know, if you have this background, then you're going to be connected into this organization. But even if you don't have that kind of thing, looking for ways that that certain characters and events that are central to the story are going to be connected to your PCs. Are they going to be connected to this organization that's friendly, or this organization that might be more antagonistic, or one that's somewhere between, or might go one way or the other?
Exactly. And that's how you can kind of start looking towards character-specific arcs, especially if it's in a published adventure.
Mm-hmm.
If it's your own adventure, you could just do... you can make whatever you want. You can do something like, to give a Critical Role example that was very, very early on, and you'll have seen if you watch the first season of Vox Machina, like the gunslinger... Immediately his deal is that he's like brooding over his family being like killed and bad stuff happening, and the bad guys who do that become like villains like in the first season of the animation and early in the actual play. And so that's a character specific arc for that character. And so character specific arcs are something that's easy to build ish when you're making your home game, but you can throw them into published adventures without too much trouble.
Yeah.
Like Linda said, think about the direction of the arc. Think about whether it's so personal that it's like that gunslinger is like, these are the people who killed my family, or whether it's more about the personal values and themes. Like if someone is like, I always want to be a pirate and get my own ship, a character-specific arc could be any adventure where you wind up with a ship in it, or you just add a ship as a reward. Doesn't have to be someone that character knew. That still becomes a very defining arc for that character.
It has to do with tying into the character's objectives, goals, and connections. So it can come in the direction of saying, okay, there's this thing that's already in the adventure, and encouraging players to build characters that go toward those things that will naturally fit. Or it can come in the direction, I'm talking about published adventures for now, because they have more flexibility in other ones, of adding things to the adventure that fit with their story. So, you know, if they have a character that they want to have a big deal for that character is to be a vampire hunter, but there's not necessarily like a ton of vampires in your adventure, you could swap out some of the villains in that adventure and be like, oh yeah, you know, now there's some vampires that are part of this organization, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be like a giant central thing, because especially when you have a character specific arc, you know, the player who is more focused on that is going to want to be more involved in the decisions and more involved in what's going on. So generally you're going to want to make sure though that like everybody can be involved in it. Though sometimes you can do a little bit with players one-on-one, if they have like a specific side story that they want to go engage with, and it's not going to involve the rest of the table so much.
That's right. So it's very important to think about whether or not it's going to be one that's literally just one-on-one or engage the rest of the table. Usually you can find a way to engage the rest of the table, and that's generally the better play.
Yes.
Because having to do long one-on-one sessions can be good for some groups, but it can be an issue for others, and for you as the GM, if you want to do that fairly to each player, that's going to take a lot of your time.
Plus then, like, if you're looking at things like what are the treasure and rewards, is that character going to get ahead or whatever. To give an example of a time when I did a one-on-one session, it was in Kingmaker, where there was a very high-level druid at the table who just wanted to go around, like, helping out various people within the kingdom. So these are, like, role-playing vignettes that aren't going to, like, give a lot of experience points or treasure or anything like that. They're really just more like, hey, let's flesh out what your character's role is within the community, and where does he draw the line between saying, okay, seriously guys, you can handle this yourself, you don't need a 16th level druid to fix it for you.
That's right. That was always fun, because he actually would do the most banal, tiny task, but when two brothers were getting into a dispute over, like, the boundary of their farm, which is actually one of the more major things that literally was kind of in his job description as the marshal to handle those disputes, but he refused because he was angry. As an Erastolite druid, he was angry that his family was fighting each other for that. He was disgusted by them and wasn't going to help them.
Yeah, so that wasn't something that any of the other players at the table would be interested in. That wasn't something that had a large impact on the story as a whole. That wasn't something that would naturally come with large rewards. And that was something that he and I both decided would be fun to do. So those were all reasons to point in the favor of that's just a side thing.
He did a lot of things to try to, as a neutral good Erastolite, like bridge the gap in the culture war that was sort of happening between the Erastolites' very rural and traditionalist approach to life, and like the cities that were popping up because of the Kingmaker campaign, with lots of chaotic religions that were like getting people to leave the farms and just do whatever they want, especially the Calistrians and the Erastolites butted heads. And he was kind of the bridge who was like, listen, we need to respect the Erastolites' values, but Erastolites, you need to understand that these Calistrians and other chaotic people are part of the kingdom too, which kind of, that's why he wound up with those.
But yeah, other examples of things like that, you know, if does your character, do you have a character who's like running a magic academy or like doing some other thing during their downtime that they're engaged with and that player wants to flesh out more, then that could be something that is more of a side thing. And then it may be like, hey, you know, you plan a little bit about what they're doing at their magic academy and a side thing, and then you have something where all of the players come together and you have it on screen because there's like a calamity at the Magic Academy, and then everybody has to go deal with it.
That's right.
Because it's the bigger problem.
So Zia Telesia is asking, are there any suggestions to integrate One Game's PC as an NPC into your own campaign? So you can do that. Those little vignettes or illusions are fun. People generally like them, especially if they know the PCs, because they also play into that other game. Trying to find a way for that PC to do so in a way that they are just kind of a cameo and aren't going to be like taking over, or also like being like, why didn't this high level retired PC from the other thing just win this for us? So you can have them show up to, like, for example, here's a good one. Resurrect Ritual, uncommon. You're looking for someone who can cast Resurrect Ritual. Maybe it's the cleric from your previous high-level campaign when the group is looking. You as the GM or roll for it and like, oh, it looks like I think they succeeded finding someone, but hey, it was that other group's cleric who comes. And then you can either play that PC yourself or have the player who played the cleric play them coming in, and you give them some notes and are like, hey, so you're only coming in for the ritual because the group is asking, and you may want, your church is having this thing, so try to hand them off this quest, and then you tell the player about it and have them play their character doing it.
A few other ones that we've had in our games is having a PC wizard from another campaign go to the kingdom in Kingmaker looking to trade spells. And that was just like...
That was actually my PC who I was typing in chat because someone was like, trigger the trap in the Lady's Light on purpose to send your arc. That was my character who did trigger the trap on purpose. and went to the kingdom of Kingmaker before Return of the Rune Lords, pretending to be Sorshen to try to get better deals from the people in the kingdom for trades. Be like, well, we can't rip off Sorshen. Yeah, absolutely.
So that was basically just used as a, well, I knew that PC had a fat and delicious spell book full of spells.
So it gave the Kingmaker party more spells.
It was a way to give the Kingmaker party more spells that was fun and thematic.
Another cameo that I had was that I had a group of 5 like ridiculous Oni that I created, one of which sort of already existed, but I buffed him a lot. For the antagonist organization in Jade Region Adventure Path. It's called the 5 Storms, but they only have like 1 storm. So I let the PCs kill one of them, the one who's supposedly invincible that I created like early on. And then so 4 of them plus a whole bunch of other dangerous things were left. And so one of the things that was true about the adventure is it had an NPC who was also in Rise of the Rune Lords. And if you know our Rise of the Rune Lords game because you watched any of our Rise of the Rune Lords episodes, you know that NPC, Shalalu Endosano, was in a bad relationship with Linda's like negligent Eldritch Knight boyfriend.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make any sense. She wanted some distance, so she traveled across the entire world. But it didn't make any sense that once teleportation was allowed again because of the plot device that stopped it being over, that he wouldn't like try to help out when she was fighting a war against people. So he came in post-game from Rise of the Rune Lords and took out, one-on-one took out one of the other storms in a duel, who could just freeze over any number of people and then they just stop. But the problem for that enemy is that he had an intelligent weapon that he looted off the BBG of Rune Lords that could do fireballs while he had already gotten frozen. And so that happened while the PCs fought the remaining 3 storms and a whole bunch of other NPCs all at once. And then an extra final battle scene where I had the one guy who was supposed to be there like absorb the spirits of the other ones who were defeated and became a void Yai monarch with like 2 hands that were separate creatures.
And you hear like the video game music rising in the background.
Yes.
It was super like
video
game and like anime tropes and all that kind of stuff, and it was awesome.
So I would say that's my answer to that question on including someone is make sure you have a good way to use them so that it's fun cameo, but that you don't overuse them or make it seem like they should just stick around and do everything.
Yeah, bring them in and then bring them out. And if especially if they are like around the same level or more powerful than your PCs, like if they're substantially lower level, then you may be able to set up something where like your PCs are guiding or mentoring or assisting those previous ones, or they're like part of their organization or things like that. But if they're the kinds of people that's like, wait, why wouldn't they just solve the problem? Particularly if you're the GM who's controlling them. And then, like, people might be like, well, my character wouldn't do that.
That's right. But another way to do it, one last way, which is also sort of character-specific, sort of, is find a place that character would be able to replace a really generic NPC. So, for example, very, very, like, pretty much one of the first things that happens in War for the Crown, so I don't think it's a spoiler, because it'll happen in your first session, is you're going to, like, a party, and, like, a patron hires you, and a Lion Blade who is affiliated with that patron, like, helps get you in through the line faster. It's just this random throwaway NPC who's never seen again and is not very important. Well, I knew that Linda had a Lion Blade character who was affiliated with the same political faction as the patron in War for the Crown. It just so happened. I mean, so was my character who triggered that trap that we were talking about. So I decided to not only, when it came to the political personages who were at the party, add my character to the people who were in that faction as the people you could talk to, but use Linda's character as the Lion Blade who gets you past the line instead of the random Lion Blade that was a throwaway Lion Blade. And so Linda's character Lucia du Soleil just appeared and ushered people in through.
Oh, another thing we did was that big crossover battle where we had the PCs from two different
Yeah,
campaigns
but that
coming
wasn't
together.
a cameo. That
That's
was
not a
like
cameo.
literally
That was,
both
yeah, that
campaigns
was
were
two
playing at the
campaigns
same
playing at the
time,
same
and so
time.
there were like 12 PCs.
Yeah, I know that's different,
in
but
the shadow play.
I was if we wanted to do like a complete record of like kinds of things you can do with campaigns coming together, that was really fun.
What happened is that two campaigns both at the same time had people from like one of their party members each got kidnapped by people from the shadow plane, which like is a place that crosses over sometimes between multiple alternate realities. So even though they were in pretty different universes, they both went to the shadow plane and we wound up being the same shadow plane villainous group that had kidnapped both of them. And so both campaigns got together and fought off the villains together and rescued their people.
And in that case, people just played their characters from both campaigns.
If they were in both campaigns,
yes.
Absolutely. So that's something you can do.
Now,
so when I talked about using session 0 in order to figure out whether or not how to put your character's arcs into a pre-written adventure, let me give you an example. So I just sort of solicited for my War for the Crown game, like what kind of characters people wanted to play. Linda wanted to play a dwarf who was a very artistic armor crafter, who was all about form and quality in that way, who was like probably from like a family of smiths. Yeah. So I said, what if she had a sister who worked for the military and like the High General of Taldor, who is all about function? Is like, no, it doesn't care what it looks like. You're going onto the battlefield. It's going to get dented. It's going to get blood on it. It needs to protect people. And because I was saying, since it says in the player's guide, you're going to work for the the liberal faction under Princess Eutropia, the military faction supports conservative faction. So you might wind up being on like separate sides of the political landscape. And Linda said, are we going to have to like murder her for that? And I said, no, you're not going to have to kill her for that, just based on the way that things go. And then Linda said, in that case, I think that's going to be really cool. So that's what we did. Similarly, another player said, I want to play a noble from a family that has a lot of wizards in it, and but I hate my family. I hate them and they're bad. And so therefore I'm extremely chaotic and kind of like a peasant uprising kind of guy because of how much I hate my family.
And if you're familiar with War for the Crown, you may already see where this is going.
Well, you know, there's a noble family with wizards in it that shows up in book 2 that the adventure path even wants an excuse for somebody to be like doing something noble in that kind of region, in that county. So they give you like forged papers of being like somewhat related to one of the other lesser nobles there. So let's say your character was from a branch family of that family that also married into the other smaller family that you were supposed to have forged papers for anyway. So your mom was from which it's a plot point in War for the Crown at the very beginning that you don't inherit through your mother at all. And then that was going to change because Princess Eutropia wanted to inherit. So the idea was that there's a small family that had no heritors. So I changed it to it had no heritors because of the old law that my player's character would have inherited it under the law that Eutropia is using to justify trying to be the heir. And since he's in Eutropia's faction, then Eutropia wrote up a thing is like, well, since this law is now changed, therefore you are also in line for this minor thing that had no heirs. And so it was not even a forgery. He actually, it was still like important to the plot maybe that it wasn't like completely solid. So it wasn't completely solid because it also depended on a rule change that Eutropia wanted that the other factions had not agreed to.
Yes.
But it wasn't like a fake. It was real and it was contentious in a different way. That also meant that he was cousins with like another one of the NPCs that was there in the area. And based on like the description of things that happened, it made like a very interesting role-playing situation because like obviously the cousin is in another faction. I mean, he doesn't like the player doesn't like his family. In fact, his parents had died and he didn't know what happened. And then his cousin like got him like sent away to like a wizard academy for training because he was a very promising wizard away from the family. And he later figured out that his cousin, who was like not a good person, but also was like worried that all the stuff that was going on over there would get the player character killed, and actually did think that the player character was a promising wizard who would help the family later on. So he was like, what do I do? My cousin's a bad guy. He was like an accomplice to some bad stuff, but he did also probably save my life by sending me out to that academy that I used to think he hated me, and so he sent me away. And so it just led to some really interesting arcs for him, and eventually, like, they made some different decisions based on that. So those are the kind of things where you can add in a character-specific art. We had another person who was an Ulfen, who bard, who was like the daughter of someone high up in the Ulfen Guard, but it's not an organization where your children get into it. It's purely meritocratic, and wanted to not be known for her father. As a follower of Felena, she wanted to be known for winning duels and just being awesome at fighting. She was like multi-classed in with Champion. And so she managed to resolve that arc later in the campaign when she became one of the best people to convince the Ulfen Guard of what was going on. And she talked to some of the different factions within the Guard, and she convinced all of them that she was amazing and that they really respected her. So by having a session 0, I was able to weave in a lot of different elements for a lot of my my different characters. Another thing was...
So to go back on that for a moment then, this included both players suggesting the kinds of things that they might want, and then you coming back with some ideas that would naturally allow it to tie into the campaign more, and then the players then having buy-in from the players about those
Correct.
Ideas.
So one of them wanted to be a peasant who was oppressed by the wizard's evil, like, noble family. And so, yeah, in fact, actually, there had been peasant murders that had happened in the past. That was, like, part of the backstory. So I was like, yeah, her parents were killed, and, like, the wizard PC had her, like, sign up, like, as a kind of like a maidservant when he to attend on him when he went to wizard school, and that got her out of there in case she was going to get killed, because her parents were part of a string of unsolved murders that had been happening back before he left for wizard school, and then they've been friends ever since and are both very chaotic and want to overthrow things. And then we had an alchemist who was just like a patriotic alchemist, it seemed, who was part of but here's the weirdest part about it, and I'm trying to avoid too many spoilers for the adventure pass, so I'm now not going to say exactly what I did for him because it was the best thing I did for anyone, but it's super spoilerific. But if you've played it or read it, you will know based on what I'm saying. So the player of the alchemist said, we're doing a playtest, because we were actually, they were like NDA'd and doing playtest of the, like, after the beta, or during the beta test, but then also like after the beta test as we were trying to shift towards the final rules for Pathfinder 2nd edition, some of those shifts before the game came out. So he's like, this is a playtest. So my alchemist goal is to find exploits in reality that will potentially cause like infinite loops to get infinite wealth or infinite life or anything kind of like that, and just figure out what those are and document it and share it. And he also said that, like, since he knew Taldor had a lot of, like, clubs and secret societies, so could he be part of something that was doing that? And I said, yes, actually. Maybe you could be, like, a pen pal with this organization that's around, that's also looking for exploits in reality, and you're just sharing your things back and forth about infinite life hacks and other kind of weird things that you're postulating. And he totally did. In fact, at the end of book 5, which involves some weird planar shenanigans, he managed to find his own infinite loop that would cause his character to live forever and join the inner circle of his organization to replace someone who had failed previously and had been removed from the inner circle of that organization. And it was a very interesting time.
Yes.
Very interesting time. And that's all I will say about that, but it was, I didn't even, like, it was great. So that's a way to make character-specific arcs in a, even when you're running a published adventure. I didn't even change the adventure very much. Like, I added the sisters, but they were already going after the military conservative faction. Like, that was just something that was going to happen.
So Damasir says, doing so much player content in Kingmaker, they haven't opened the book, and player-driven content, they haven't opened the book in weeks. So I think this also gets back into something that, like,
Linda.
yeah, definitely, where these character-specific arcs don't necessarily have to be something that you as the GM come up with. Players, they may not even just, it may not be in session 0, maybe throughout the game that they latch onto something. It could be some part of the existing campaign or some other thing that they decide that they want to do, and then that becomes something that's important to them. Like, let's say that, you know, they become really invested in, you know, getting revenge on a certain person, or very invested in creating something or repairing something or what have you, then that can become the foundation of character-specific arc.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the best character-specific arcs, because you know for a fact that they really want to pursue that. And so, like, at the risk of once again talking about, like, a GM blunder that happened to a GM who was literally GMing for their first time, I'll bring up Bob the Guard again, because it could have been a good character-specific arc, but was not. It was an opportunity not taken. So Bob the Guard was a guard that my first time GM running Shackled Cities, who was GMing for me, my character was coming from a different city to the city of Cauldron in Shackled City, and is a librarian, and she wanted to find a library. And so I came in, and we knew on the map where the city I was, like, which direction, which gate I would come from. And so he looked at that, and I guess he must have seen that the library was, like, 2 blocks to the west of where I came in. It was super easy to get to. And this was a problem, because the adventure starts, well, I'll tell you in a minute if you haven't heard this story before. So I got to the gate, and he was like, he created extemporaneously this NPC called Bob the Guard. And I was talking to Bob, and he's like, oh, welcome to Cauldron. It's great that you're here. And I was like, I want to go to the Blue Crater Academy and check out their library. He's like, Blue Crater? Well, yes, if you turn to your right and go, and he gave these directions. And keep in mind, if I turn to my left, Cauldron is called Cauldron. It's around a caldera and a volcano. It's a circle. I would have been there in, like, a block and a half. He had me go to the right to a sketchy back alley that, like, was so out of the way, where I was ambushed by a group of thieves, because the adventure starts where everybody's ambushed by a group of thieves in that spot on the map, which was as far as possible from where I was trying to. Actually, it was even worse than that, because it was even more than a whole 180-degree revolution. But, like, it would have been past the Blue Crater in the direction of going to the Blue Crater. So the other PCs, it was easy, because some of them lived in Cauldron, or they were, like, one of them was a cleric, the Sun God, and the Temple of the Sun God was kind of near there.
Yeah.
But, so, at that point, he sent me into a back alley where I got ambushed by thieves. I was like, this is very suspicious. Are any of you suspicious of Bob the Guard? And my other PCs like, maybe. And I was like, yeah, maybe, but you don't know. We don't know what's going on with these thieves. So we investigated the thieves that attacked us, and they were the members of the Last Laugh Thieves Guild or something like that. That may not be their literal name. It's been decades. And we determined that Thieves Guild was created out of guards who were not paid enough money as guards. And so therefore they became thieves, and they would, like, trick people into going to places where they would attack them for some additional money. So my character was like, wait a minute,
Bob the Guard.
It definitely was Bob the Guard. That definitely was Bob the Guard. He was part of the Last Laugh. He sent me here. There's no way any human being would have said to go along this path, because previously the ranger was like, well, maybe he wanted you to take the scenic route or something. And it's like, and then all the other PCs were like, you're right, it definitely was. And then the GM was like, time out. Okay, it wasn't Bob the Guard. I see why this would actually be a very good fit, but I really just made him up because I needed to get you to that spot. And I was like, okay, but my character is still going to look for Bob the Guard, because the guard captain then hired us to, like, go look for a thing. And I was like,
you should.
I was like, I will, but one of our terms is that you have to pay us money to buy silver, because my character was a conspiracy theorist, and that was just her character. She was an archivist class from 3rd edition, and she was a conspiracy theorist about everything, so she decided, based on, like, some random thing that was on there, and the name sounding like a vampire name, that she needed anti-vampire weapons. So she's like, you have to buy us anti-vampire weapons, and you have to look for Bob the Guard, because he's a member of the Last Laugh Thieves Guild who got away when we went to their base. And the guard captain was like, okay, I don't, there's a lot of guards named Bob, I don't know if we'll find him. And then they didn't, but See, it could have been a character-specific arc.
Yeah,
very
and also
easily.
that I think that also goes to show like sort of a more advanced GM tip of like, you know, if the player suggests that something might be true and you didn't think about it, but it seems awesome, then
And like the GM thought that sounded really
yeah, then you
interesting.
can make it be true.
He could have made Bob be like a high level like mafia kingpin of the last
And then
lap.
had Bob show up in a later adventure, where
Or even just like while they're trying to look for Bob causes problems for us in that next mission, and then we realize we've been sabotaged and someone's leaking things from the guards. And then in like a much later adventure, eventually the guard captain's like, "Oh, we figured out which Bob it was, but he's fled." And then in a much later adventure, Bob comes in instead, and we have to deal with like I think there's like a thing where like a monkey is like trying to cause a flood or something, and then Bob could have been helping him or like something. I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
The point is that you could absolutely change your mind about the plot if the players come up with a really cool idea, and that's something we've said in multiple episodes, but is totally true for character-specific arcs as it is for anywhere else. That's a really good point, Linda. So I don't wanna beat on my GM for that. That was literally the first session he's ever run a game, and he did a good job overall. But Bob the guard, I will never forget.
Bob the guard. It's funny, these random things that become memorable flashpoints.
Yes, well, it was just very memorable because my character was the conspiracy theorist that I desperately tried to make her like a wild conspiracy theorist who was like wrong by just completely for no reason making claims, and then just like
large number of them are correct anyway.
She was right just a lot when I was trying to show that she was like sometimes brilliant with her high wisdom and like was maybe right about things. Her main claim that she was like her whole central character narrative was like a heresy from like early Forgotten Realms, because we moved it from Greyhawk to the Forgotten Realms, that like Lathander was a PR move by the old sun god Amonitor, who failed as like a lawful sun god to stop a cataclysm, which had been a known heresy from that setting that was like obviously wrong. But anyway, in 4th edition D&D, they said that heresy is correct, and we're going back to Amonitor because he was Lathander all wrong. And all the time I was like, well, I was right about every other thing, but my main thing was wrong, just like I wanted it to be for her, because she's supposed to just be a wild theorist. And then after the game was over, like years later, I had to go tell my GM, I was like, guess what? In 4E, Alkyone was right about Lathander too. He was like, what is going on? How could that happen? So, yes, players who are very proactive can really help you make character-specific arcs, and you could just kind of follow what they want to do. Be careful with that somewhat, though. It's great, but if it's always the same person who creates those character-specific arcs and you follow them, it can put too much spotlight on them. So you will want to, in that case, come up with a way to create a character-specific arc for Shire players. So to give another example I've said on the stream before about engaging players in role-playing, if you know which of your players already are the Shire players, then you can come up with a way to engage them for sure. So, for example, I had one player in one of my games who just, like, you know, he seemed like he was having fun, and later, like, I saw him really excited at a certain time. I could tell he was having fun, but he's very introverted, and he wouldn't talk that much other than to take his turn. At least not to the other NPCs. There were other extroverted players who would have their characters go talk. He had made a character with high intelligence and low charisma anyway, so it made sense. He didn't have the social skills on his PC, and the other people were very eager to talk to NPCs. So I gave him an intelligent book item that could only telepathically communicate with him. And it had an agenda, and it wanted him to do it. So it would like push him into also getting into social situations, because it wanted him to start dating, because the book itself would lose all of its power if the family line didn't continue, because it gets bond with the next person in the family, and everyone else in his family had previously been killed due to their actual unethical magical experiments that maybe the book convinced them to do. That's okay. So he had this like somewhat ethically questionable but very smart and like helpful in other ways book that was talking to him, and he would talk to the book because no one else could, and he would sometimes do what the book said, and he seemed to enjoy like the scenes of his character like was meant to be like awkwardly communicating with people here, like he didn't want to, but the book was pushing him, and like to show that that was his character going outside of his comfort zone sometimes. And so, like, that's one way to do it. Think of a reason that it can't be the PC who, even if they're trying to be helpful by doing something when the other player's reticent, goes in and does it. Because you don't... You could also just talk to the other player and be like, you're doing nothing wrong, but I want to let this player do something, so just let them do it. But it's easier if in the story there's a reason it has to be that person.
Yeah, so and for another intelligent item example, I had a magic sword in the Kingmaker game that there was a player had a backstory of, you know, they had been tormented in the World Wound and had managed to by demons in the World Wound and had managed to escape. And then they had this sword with them that's a magic sword that held the spirit of a paladin who had died.
Well, first it was just a sword.
First it was just a sword, yeah.
Eventually it talked to him because it held the spirit of, like, the daughter of one of the
paladins,
who also was kidnapped.
And then, like, sent to the World Wound, but the spirit was there, and, like, she was trying to encourage him to be brave and fight and stand up for what's right.
He was also sometimes cowardly, but the sword convinced him to, like, be righteous and good, and he felt like she was his moral compass and conscience, because anytime he was gonna, like, maybe abandon his friends or run away, and is like, no, but these innocents need to be saved. You have to go up there and fight and kill these bad guys. And then eventually Linda was counting the number of times that the sword got a kill, because after it was quenched in the blood of a certain number of, I think, like, 666 beings or something like that.
It was
later in the campaign. The nascent demon lord who was inside of the sword, who had been the one who kidnapped him and killed that paladin daughter, was a real person. She is dead. She was just impersonating the voice of her.
Yeah, she just needed blood and was very frustrated by how cowardly he was.
She was like the daughter of, like, Zora and someone else who wanted to be manifested on the material plane and was frustrated by this cowardly person. And so his conscience turned out to be a demon lord, who was then released onto the material plane.
You think you guys actually managed to stop the release, because at the time when she was about to...
Oh yeah, we figured it out right before.
You figured it out because there was a period where she was a little more obvious right before the activation, and you guys figured out that something was going wrong.
Our diviner got, I think, a higher level divination spell that managed to detect that and we stopped her at the last minute.
Yes.
And so she was only able to manifest, like, a much weaker form, which you're able to defeat.
Yes.
And after that, the fighter was devastated because his conscience that convinced him to do good things was a demon lord all along. So he actually fell from neutral good into true neutral over the fact that, like, all this had happened, and he decided to just worship Pharasma instead of his previous deity. And he just he was just a lot more cowardly. He wouldn't go up to the front lines on things. He had, like, a really special sword that Linda had dropped for him that was a different sword than that.
Yeah, because I was like, well, I got rid of his other sword. Let me give him another sword that's more powerful.
And he just never used it because he ran away. So, like, the wizard taunted at him and was like, if you're never going to go in the front line, you should give this special sword to the cohort who's actually out there in the front. And he was like, okay. And he just gave it to her.
And then the cohort was like, that was not supposed to work. No.
The cohort was like, what? No. Wait. Because it was sort of an intervention.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, that's fine. And, like, he had a card from the deck, Harrow deck of many things. It was another way to create character-specific arcs, because it totally did in Kingmaker. That, also made him get an angel that could come help him each day, and the angel was trying to convince him. He's like, Angel, stop this. You're just
stop with this redemption.
Annoying
this nonsense. Go away.
And eventually, he decided to, when he fully converted to Pharasma, change to a psychopomp who would
he's like, now there's not an annoying angel bothering me all the time.
Yep, that's right. So, like, yeah, randomized deck of many things. People say they can be campaign destroying, but they can help create character-specific arcs, too. Like when the arrogant elf, who was a little bit of an elven supremacist, got a card that made a genie fall in love with him, and he said, well, I can't love you because you're not an elf. So then she got someone to wish, using one of her wishes for the arrogant elf to become a human.
Yes, and the arrogant elven cohort had a crush on him for a while, and then he started to eventually reciprocate her feelings. And
for a while, he just didn't. He was like, nah.
Yeah.
And then he did, but then because she was also an arrogant
Yeah.
elf, and then right as he was like had reciprocate about to tell her his feelings, or he just had,
Yeah.
he got turned into a human, and then
Yes.
she was like, "I'm sorry, I don't like,
I
only like elves."
Yeah.
And he also was the person who was in charge of education for the kingdom, and he was like, now that I'm not an elf, I can't be in charge of education for the kingdom. What would happen if a human was in charge of education?
Cohort, now you're in charge of
He
education.
was just like a weirdly, extremely,
Yeah.
extremely arrogant elf. So he became the treasurer
Yes.
instead, and put his cohort, who was still an elf, in charge of education, and that became like sort of his redemption arc for his like weirdly prejudiced opinions, although not really, because he
Not
didn't
really, because
completely
he still
overcome
like
them.
yeah, he didn't completely. He did somewhat understand a little better, but yeah.
I think that like she cursed him also to be the wish made him become a human, but not forever. Like until he could realize
Yeah.
like
Realize that his like elven supremacy.
His elven supremacy was like xenophobic and terrible.
Yes. And the player's like, yeah, this is gonna be a while.
This is gonna be a while. Yep. So I think he eventually didn't completely realize it enough to remove it, but got rid of it with like another.
He got rid of it with another wish. Yeah, he was like
he learned something about that, but he didn't completely learn his lesson, and he had to get rid of it with another wish. So there's definitely a lot of ways that those are some ways to get in character specific arcs. Another one is just like with like recurring enemies who have a vendetta against a particular character, because or that a character has a vendetta against that enemy for something they did in the past. If you swear vengeance, that can make a good character specific arc. You want to come up with a way to figure out what's going on with that arc, so you may wind up in the situation like that Order of the Stick one, where like the assassin who was like Haley's rival is sitting playing cards, and suddenly it shows like a ding next to her head, and
like,
all the other card players are like, what just happened? Did you level up? You were doing nothing. And she's like, yeah, Haley must have leveled up, I guess.
Yeah, come up with a justification.
You may want a better justification if they get stronger, or just let them stagnate. Especially that's good if the enemy was like a severe boss or something like that the first time the PCs fought them, and then later the PCs level up. It's like, no, now I am on equal footing to my rival, and maybe if they escape again, it's like, now my rival's actually weaker than me. Has to run away, and you can feel progress if the enemy who is a recurring villain doesn't actually get significantly stronger. Maybe they do get a little stronger for the things they're doing, but the PCs get stronger faster. So that's something I did in Rise of the Rune Lords with the villain of Book 2 escaped. If you've been listening to our stories, she's still escaped. She escaped like 4 or 5 times in a row.
Well, at least the last time she just saw us and she's like, nope.
We didn't get there, but yes. It eventually got to the point where as soon as the PCs appeared on her first turn, she left. She didn't even do anything else. She just, it's like, oh, it's them. Leave. She was trying to hide. She wasn't even trying to get to them. She was hiding in the safest place she could think of that had multiple magic wards on it, which was the final dungeon. And the PCs came there, and she's like, I'm gone.
Yeah.
She had just reached that point with them. So, basically, find what motivates your player characters and your players. Find things that sort of trigger emotions in your players, not even just their characters. Enemies that make them mad, situations that make them really feel like they want to help. Characters that they just loved randomly. They're just like, I like this NPC. And it was a throwaway.
That NPC is going to be more important in the story.
Make an arc for them. That can become a character-specific arc. Or, like an NPC... Like, I had, like, a random acolyte who was, like, healing people in the campaign that was the first one that Linda joined. And, the PCs really liked her for some reason, and they were trying to convince that whole temple that, like, a giant red tide was going to kill the entire city. And they they decided they wanted to convince that acolyte to come with them, and they rolled, like, a natural 20. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure. She's convinced, even though the rest of the temple is not convinced, and she just kind of leaves the temple, even though she hasn't finished training yet, and comes with you. And they were so happy, even though it was kind of like a GMPC sort of situation in that I was playing her and she was following around the party. They were too low level for leadership or anything like that, but it was what they wanted. They all wanted her to come.
They wanted her there, and also, like, her build was very much like, I am the healing cleric, so
she
she's
was like
not
a heal bot acolyte.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So just look for things that make your players feel something, or things that are tied to the backstories that they want,
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't give you backstories and you don't know what they feel and you don't know what their goals are, because their goals can help you create things,
Mm-hmm.
figure that out in session 0. Talk to them. Even if they didn't come up with anything, you can sort of tease it out of them. Give them a few choices based on what they did describe to you.
Yeah.
If someone's like, I'm a mercenary fighter, and then and you're like, okay, anything else? No, I'm a mercenary fighter, and I came here as a mercenary. You can be like, okay, so did you become a mercenary because you love money more than anything else? Were you like in debt? Are you doing it to like help pay your family somewhere or somebody else? Did you do it because you love fighting and this gives you a chance to just get a lot of different fights for different clients? Do you want to see the world and travel around? Like, what's your motivation? Why did you become a mercenary? And then they might be like, no, I want to be the strongest ever. And as a mercenary, I will only give my my service to the people who are challenging me and who are letting me face strong opponents. And then that's enough. Like, just being a mercenary isn't, but that's enough to help you try to come up with a character-specific arc for that mercenary character.
Yeah. Who has helped them along the way to become stronger, and what kinds of challenges are they going to find enticing? You know, is that mean that you want to have like a little fighting tournament or something in your campaign at some point, a chance to really show off strength and build it?
That's right. So yeah, basically, if I were to summarize everything that we said, it's find things in the characters' backstories, motivations, or the players or their characters, like emotions, feelings, and investment, and just lean into that using session 0, using what you've seen just during the sessions, like the Bob the Guard example that was not taken, but other examples that were taken, like the Cleric Acolyte, and you can just add in these arcs that can make characters get really invested in things. Like, for example, there was just this random, like, goofy Diabolist who, in that same Red Tide situation, agreed to help the party stop the Red Tide using his weird diabolical things. He was from the evil Northern Empire of Diabolists, and he was in exile, and mostly because he didn't want to kill anyone or sacrifice their souls. And so he helped them, and then later he sacrificed himself and sold his soul to, like, protect. He actually wound up, like, falling in love with, like, the Acolyte random person who was also with the PCs, and to save her and the rest of the PCs, he sold his soul to the devil and was able to help protect that. But then the PCs were like, they really liked that guy, so they decided to go to hell to like try to bring him back, and they wound up getting caught in the machinations of like the Archdukes of Hell. And it led to a whole bunch of other things where one of them was like forced to become a disciple of the Archduke, and he managed to cheat the Archduke and not become a disciple, but the lasting scar on his character was he had a feat for being a disciple of that character that was a dead feat on his character sheet. And boy, like, that character's parents were, if their parents were killed, which they weren't, that probably wouldn't care. If the character, like, even lost a magic item, might not care as much. But having a dead feat on the character's sheet
just
was
for
like,
the player?
just the feeling of the inefficiency of that. So that created an arc where the character was going to try to find one of the few places in the world where that feat that represented a immutable pact that could not be retrained, because it was a pact with an Archduke that he cheated, could be removed in like a paradisical garden. And that like also led towards the main plot, because that was exactly what the villain of the campaign wanted the group to do.
Yeah. But I mean, the player was definitely like, wow, you know, this really feels like the sting of an infernal pact to have a feat that I can't...
He even said that. Yeah. He was like, I didn't know what you were going to do because I figured you would let me out of it if I found a really good loophole, but that I didn't want it to feel cheap, that I had just beaten an Archduke like that, and I felt like having a lasting scar made sense. And I didn't think of anything that would feel like that to me, but having this feat that I couldn't get rid of the missing feet on the character, like, it really does. It really motivates me. And so, like, you need to know your players, because I had a sense of that. Honestly, it would probably motivate me if I had a feat like that. It would feel really bad that that feat was there. I might have also been motivated by some of the things that didn't motivate that player as much. But either way, character-specific arcs depend on each individual character and each individual player. So know your players, or get to know them if they're new players that are new to you. Ask
and you
them.
can also get to know those kinds of strategies.
They can
that
help
they use.
you.
Like if you have a player who's always proposing, like, let's sneak in or let's do these kinds of things, then that suggests the kind of do a heist, and that's the kind of thing that they would enjoy. Particularly if their strategies. If there's a strategy that a particular player keeps suggesting that's not effective for a little while, having a chance to do something that really makes that strategy shine.
Yes, and you don't have to be as sneaky as me. Like some of the things I said for War for the Crown, especially that Alchemist, super sneaky. But listen, if you can't think of anything, it's okay to point blank go up to the player and be like, hey, I came up with character-specific arcs for Linda and these other people, but I can't really think of a good one for you on my own. Do you have any ideas of what would be a good character-specific arc that would really make you excited with your character? And they might be like, yeah, you know what? My character's always wanted to just find a treasure map and then chase it to a treasure. And I also think that's cool. And like you may have had no idea because that just didn't come up. And then you're like, oh, okay, well then, yeah. Actually, when I said that you found that old parchment in that bottle there and that it was mostly hard to see it. So you guys found a wizard who has a spell that can like refurbish it, and it turns out that it's a map that leads to somewhere. And so you can literally enlist your players to help you, to help them come up with a character specific arc, and that is okay. There's not a problem with that, and that does not mean like you're a bad GM. That means you're a good GM because you are willing to admit that you might need help rather than just being too prideful to do so.
Yeah, because I mean, you can't read minds, so if players
unless you can, in which case that is still sort of working with your players in a different way to make their arcs.
Alrighty,
I think that's good. So let's say bye to YouTube, and then we're gonna figure out what our timing is on Tuesdays for sure with all of you, and what episode we'll do. Bye YouTube. See you next time.
Bye.